What is a weird NSFW historical fact? A ton of ancient Roman graffiti still exists. And it's basically all DCK jokes, crude humor, bragging about SX, etc. The OG Xbox Live. Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, known as the father of microbiology, would have been easier on a slide. In World War I, British spies would use semen as invisible ink for their letters. Actually very effective, as it would show up in a black light. But not in any of the normal ways to detect invisible ink, such as heat. French President Félix Faure died while getting a blowjob. Don't know if he finished though. The Maya people had complex comics similar to our own today. There is comic of a rabbit stealing a man's clothes, and in translation his speech bubble says "smell your sweat. Wizard penis." There's also a museum with a large collection of ceramics that are adorned with comically exaggerated reproductive features. My favorite being a cup with a built-in straw shaped like a DCK. Sadly, they will probably never meet the public. Roman brothels had pictures of the prostitutes' specialties above the door to their room. Napoleon's penis was cut off in 1821 during his autopsy, and it's still circulating around. The last known purchase was at an auction in 1977 by a urologist named John J. Latimer, and it's still sitting in their household to this day. Don't know if this is historical. It's more religion. But in Maori mythology, Maui died when he was crushed by the obsidian vagina teeth of the goddess Hainenui-Tipo. Well, they cut that scene out of Moana. Until 1977. Blue Cross and Blue Shield covered elective clitorectomies of children. For decades, a centerfold of a Playboy magazine was the gold standard to test image compression algorithms on. Josephine Bonaparte was well known for her acts in the sack. Picasso's buddy wrote a poem about his wiener. What a friendship. Writing poetry about your buddy's hog. In the 15th century, an erotic novel called The Tale of Two Lovers was written by a man named Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, who later became Pope Pius II. Benjamin Franklin loved to bang old women because they couldn't get pregnant. He would write literature on the topic. It's hilarious. A common folk magic practice to bewitch a man in early modern Europe, c. 1400-1600s, involved a woman making bread or pastry dough, kneading it, and pressing it against her naked vulva before baking it and giving it to the target in question. It allegedly made the woman irresistible to the man. Muff pastry. Earliest reference to a condom was in 3000 BC. It was made of a sheep's bladder. Other historical references to condoms include the Egyptian and Roman empires. A condom found in Sweden was dated to about 1640. It was made of pig intestines and was reusable. Came with instructions written in Latin. A 20-inch DLDO was found in an old latrine in Poland, dating to the 1800s. It was made of leather, wood and bristles. Bristles? You sure it wasn't a toilet brush? Street names in medieval England were often descriptive of what business or services could be found on that street. One guess what kind of business you'd find on Gropek NTE Lane. In medieval Britain, it was believed that a woman could only conceive when she orgasmed. And so, the Catholic Church actively promoted and encouraged sex that brought the woman to orgasm. In medieval times, to torture the people that broke the law, they would rope them in place over a triangular spike and then tie some weights to them. In a course of about 5 hours, their arsehole would be stretched probably 3, and they would be in more pain than like. Adult raccoons can fit through an opening as small as 3 inches. JFK was a massive SX addict, and he said at one point he would get migraines without SX. I forgot where he said that, but I learned in a few years ago and I still find it funny. Saint Bernard got his sainthood for having a dream about the Virgin Mary lactating into his mouth. Or in other words, Saint Bernard got his sainthood for a wet dream. Cleopatra was the product of 4 consecutive generations of brother-sister marriages. The Ptolemies were adamant about keeping the royal bloodline pure, so they didn't allow it to fork. And you thought the Targaryens and Lannisters were bad. Vlad Dracula. Yes, that Dracula. Tepes of Wallachia and his brother were molested by the Ottoman Emperor as children. This is thought to be the reason for his extreme hatred of the Ottomans and why he used brutal tactics like impaling against him. King Gustav II of Sweden, who reigned in the late 18th century, was under a lot of pressure to make an heir with his queen. One night when they were supposed to have sex, he called on his stablemaster, a known womanizer, and asked him on advice on where to physically put his DCK. The stablemaster explained as good as he could, and the king went into the bedroom again where his queen was waiting. A few minutes later he came out again and told the stablemaster to enter too. He later had to guide the king inside with his own hand to get them going. Women and men in France at Versailles would just pee anywhere. Constantly. There were no bathrooms. Just a few chamber pots, but not enough, and they were drinking a lot of wine all the time. So courtyards, inside corners, stairways, anywhere. Fesses too, of course. Visitors to the palace would remark on how much it stank. Horribly. The most gorgeous palace, covered in gold. To add to this, Louis XIV's brother was a little more into hygiene than most people at Versailles, and he was constantly mocked for things like bathing, having his clothes washed, and not taking a tea in the corridor. To thank you for the award. King Edward VI was DTF all the time, but he was so hefty he couldn't do much. So he had a special SX chair made for pleasuring the ladies. For a long time no one knew how the bodies would lay down on it, until they realized it was meant for threesomes. The guy that invented Wonder Woman had an extremely kinky SX life. He had a polygamous relationship and was very into BDSM and bondage. This bled heavily into his life philosophy and writing. Early Wonder Woman comics have very overtly sexual themes, though this has been mostly removed from modern interpretations of the character. Her lasso is a holdover from this time. Blackbeard and his crew of pirates had a special horn that they used to insert into their urethra. This was then used to flush in mercury, which was believed to be the cure for syphilis. Andrew Jackson had a parrot that wouldn't stop swearing. Many children were injured and harmed during the American Industrial Revolution. In some cases, children that attempted to flee factories were shackled to their workstations to prevent them from running off. Someone managed to give us a historical NSFW. Hitler and JFK slept with the same Miss Denmark. Napoleon, don't remember which one, would write his lady and tell her not to bathe in the days leading up to his arrival. In short, Bonaparte. He specifically requested Josephine not wash because he loved tongue buffing a manky muff. There was religious group where you can have sex freely as long as you don't ejaculate. Edit. Catholics? The chainsaw was invented to cut through the pubic bone of a woman during childbirth to help delivery. It was like on a loose chain that was inserted and pulled back and forth, slowly chewing away at the bone. I read a compilation of interviews with women who had it done to them. It's more horrifying than anyone is thinking. Many Roman baths were creative with their locker organization system. In one example from Pompeii, different graphic sex acts, including a lesbian strap-on scene, were displayed above each clothing slot. Oh right. I left my toga under the threesome. One of the historical figures in Bhutan was the mad monk who went around subduing demons with his penis, known as the Thunderbolt of Flaming Wisdom. Even to this day, extremely detailed paintings of penises are painted on buildings in Bhutan. Fun fact: Jesus Christ was Jewish, which means he would have been circumcised after his resurrection, according to the Bible, and ascension to heaven. His foreskin would have remained behind on earth, and was therefore considered a holy relic. Needless to say, actually owning a piece of the body of Christ was a hot topic. So much so that the Pope had to establish a special office for determining the veracity of supposed foreskins of Christ. At one point there were as many as 14 confirmed relics of Christ's foreskin floating around in Europe. Bonus fun fact. The test to determine if the purported foreskin was in fact the real foreskin of Christ was for one of the papal officers to cut off a little bit of foreskin leather, put it in their mouth, suck on it to get it moist, and then decide if it tasted like God. Einstein had a fart fetish. LBJ would routinely hold meetings in the bathroom while he was taking a sh-tea. He also called his DCK Jumbo. Edit. LBJ equals Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was president of the US from 1963 to 1969. Walt Whitman and Oscar Wilde definitely ducked. Normally, I'd want sources. But then I sit back. I think of who Walt Whitman was, who Oscar Wilde was, that they ran in the same circles. And yeah, they clearly ducked. Dunno if this counts, but Isaac Newton died a virgin, so now every time you feel bad that you still didn't lose your virginity, just remember you're still on par with Isaac Newton LMAO. He also realized that if he divided his life into an infinite number of time slices, his chances of getting laid approached zero as the time slice approached infinity. Ancient Egyptians used to stick crocodile fesses and other things up their lady parts as birth control. The thing about that is, it actually works. Crocodile fesses has some chemical in it that prevents pregnancy. There's a popular myth that Catherine the Great died by being crushed by a horse. This was after she suspended the horse to partake in some fun times. In reality she died of a stroke, which is much less entertaining to imagine. Pocahontas was a child when Smith arrived, yet people made romantic fanfiction out of them. Victorian women who suffered from hysteria went to the doctor for treatment. The treatment was the doctor getting them off via clitoral stimulation. Old Timmy man. Doctor. My wife, whom has had 3 children and 0 orgasms this year, cries a lot. Doctor. She is obviously hysterical. Send her in. There is a temple in India dedicated to sex. It has various statues with many different sex positions and naked girls. Check it out on Google, there are some pretty crazy ones. Also Kamsutra. First kind of sex education book. Gonorrhea was nicknamed the clap based on certain treatments for it. Way back in the day. Because the penis can have some lovely discharge. It was thought that clapping on it or smashing it would rid the pen of its goo and cure the infection. Sometimes this meant whacking their wee-hoo on a desk, smashing it with a book, anything to smack the stuff out of there. I bet you fellas are happy they don't do that anymore. I hope. Elizabeth Bathory is believed to be the first female serial killer. Born in August 1560 Hungary, she is reported to have killed over 500 young girls and bathed in fire blood. Though this is very likely to be highly exaggerated. What isn't disputed is that Bathory likely killed a lot of young people. Genghis Khan had many wives and concubines. These women were often princesses or queens that were taken captive or gifted to him. He provided them their own camps to live in and manage. Each camp also contained junior wives, concubines. The guards had to pay special attention to the individual camp in which Genghis Khan slept, which could change every night as he visited different wives. 5% of world's male population are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. Napoleon's penis was removed by the coroner who did the autopsy. It was preserved and has been sold and passed down for over 150 years. A professor of urology at Columbia University bought it in 1977 for $7,000. And ownership passed to his daughter when he died in 2005. Catherine the Great of Russia had a whole room of sex-related curiosities. She collected dildos and other sex toys from all over, and had ornate pieces of furniture with penises carved into them, as well as lots of erotic art. She was a little obsessed, to put it mildly. Big sex orgies were so popular in ancient Greek times that they threatened the way of life in politics. So the big wahoo made up the Greek gods just went AYO. We got a god of orgies now. Can you stop PLS now? And it worked. A lot of ancient artwork on ancient Egyptian buildings is just straight up PRN. Like historians believe a bunch of peeps would just go up to a certain wall and jack it off there. One to be debated. Literature written by Vikings, actual Vikings not monks, all have at least 3 DCK jokes or references in them. There's an old joke. The Greeks invented the orgies. The Romans added the women. The Roman Colosseum may have hosted executions where the convicted was arped to death in front of the roaring crowd by a specially trained animal. The most famous account, which is debated, was when the imperial poisoner Locusta was allegedly publicly arped to death by a drunk giraffe. Do I really even need to bring up the name of H.P. Lovecraft's cat? Convicted murderer Hamida Jandabi became the last person to meet his end by the national razor after he was executed by the guillotine in 1977. National razor being the guillotine. 1977. Roald Dahl was a Essex spy. In 2017 approximately 1,600,000 people died from diarrhea diseases. Pope Alexander VI liked to watch horses get it on. It's said he would watch the mayhem do it while laughing uproariously from his balcony. Mozart had a scat fetish. I'm super late here, but there is an ancient Greek play where the women are protesting and trying to stop the men going off to war, so they refuse to have sex with them. As the play goes on, all the men's penises grow to enormous sizes on stage in front of the audience. That play is actually still around today. I studied it in drama a few years back. I played a man whose wife leads him on very heavily, and just before the point of no return, let's say, she leaves him with a giant overly pronounced stiffy. Emperor Elagabalus had more boyfriends than years in power in Rome. She, it is unclear, but we can assume she, was also the most powerful transgender in history, as she wanted a vaginoplasty and often cross-dressed quite often. On a lighter note, you can say they when gender is unknown. Graham crackers were not made for pie crusts or s'mores. They were made as an effort to reduce stimulation. This reduction in stimulation was believed to stop the urge to masturbate. True. Oof, gonna get lost. Not a great one. A con for diamonds was pulled off by a French madam and one of her girls, who at one point pretended to be Marie Antoinette. The target was a priest who should have known better. The whole mess got so escalated that it became an alternative fact that contributed to the French Revolution. Every year in ancient Egypt. So that the Greeks were pretty gay is pretty well known. Well, the Romans were too in their own way. The Romans schematized sex. Roll, penetrator. Penetrated, and hole, mouth. Vagina. Ass. They had different terms for each. Catullus 16 famously demonstrates this well in a fun filthy poem. Basically for a man. Top whoever. Man or woman. However, what is verboten is more interesting. So a proper man must never let himself be ducked. To be penetrated is the role of a woman, however. Gets more interesting still. So in Roman culture the mouth had special significance. So being violated there was extra shameful. It was worse to be a cocksucker than a bottom. And it is also shameful to go down on a woman. Something about how that is the women taking the active and penetrative role in sex, and that is unnatural. As with all rules, people still did what they did. Norms are made to be ignored. Then just as now. Thomas Jefferson's slave Sally Hemings was half-sister to his wife Martha. Jefferson kept Hemings in a WAPA basement and had 6 children by her. It's infuriating how some historians try to portray Hemings as his mistress or lover. As if an underage slave can willingly consent to sex or procreation with their slavey owner. She was definitely a victim of sexual abuse, and it wasn't romantic. In some places to work for female royals you had to get your penis chopped off. In 1998, the French writer and professor Thierry Leguay wrote a history of fellatio, El Histoire Sine de la Fellation, in which he describes how the Chinese Empress Wu Hu, who reigned during the Tang dynasty from 690 to 705 AD, used her position to decree that all visiting dignitaries pay their respects by performing cunnilingus on her. American slaves were systematically uphead to dilute their gene pool. By 1970, the average black American still derived 20% of their ancestry from Europeans despite over 100 years of segregation. Compare that with the white Americans only deriving 1% of their genes on average from Africans. I highly doubt that was the motivating factor for the assault. On the other side of the African continent, slaves taken by the Muslim East Africa slave trade were routinely castrated. Sensitive animal lovers, consider yourselves warned. Some branches of paganism were anything but animal friendly. I read an article many years back that states pagans may have had a very ducked up way of summoning gods. Basically, in paganism, certain gods had certain animals that they favored. So, if you were a desperate pagan and you really wanted a favor from some god, what could you do to make that god give you what you want? Answer: capture one of the animals the god in question favored, and brutally torture it in the hopes that its cries of anguish would attract the god, who would then grant you any wish you desired so long as you would stop torturing its beloved beast. As an animal lover, I shudder to think how many innocent animals were tortured for hours or days by primitive tribes in order to summon a non-existent deity. I mean, it's wildly horrific and inhumane, but Jesus, threatening your gods instead of praying to them is a whole new world of wow. I don't know who Rasputin is, but he liked a duck. There are penises carved into the road in Pompeii on the road from the docks pointing in the direction of the red light district. Horny sailors needed to get some fast. Benjamin Franklin had a penis. The oldest depiction of deep butt is from a mural in a 2,000-year-old Roman bathhouse. Humans haven't changed that much. Hey Claudius, look. I have made the image of the male member. Yet it has a face and a posterior. Huh. Guys, you are a joker. It. Lots of source, less rumor and urban legend, and a few actual facts. I read that monks in the past did some gay things in feudal Japan or Heian period. Reason would be Hillary Clinton, who would have had the smallest DCK of any president in American history if she was elected. No way. What about Trump? William Shakespeare did the first yo mama joke. The Romans found a plant that was apparently such an effective birth control. Cleopatra had the first vibrator made out of wood. I believe it would hold bees in it, so when she hit it or shook it up, the bees will get agitated and make vibration. Engineer here. Nope. Queen Victoria was a smackhead. 2 raccoons can fit into your ass simultaneously since they can fit into spaces 4 inches wide, and your asshole can stretch up to 8 inches. Rapsatin's penis was 12 inches long. Soft! Exclamation point. Cue Metal Gear surprised guard noise. Prostitutes in the 1700-1800s shaved their vaginas to ensure they didn't catch crabs. But instead of appearing as prostitutes, they wore merkins. Most men in history who had very close friends were usually more than just friends. Confirmed bachelor. Long-time aide. Hitler only had one ball. Hitler only had one ball. Graham crackers and Kellogg's cornflakes were based off of a diet that was meant to curb a person's desire to masturbate. Marie Antoinette's brother heard about how King Louis was bad at sex and said he wished he could have been there to whip the king until he ejaculated from pure rage like a donkey. Countess Elizabeth Bathory was said to have bathed in the blood of 650 of her servants, including children, to maintain her youth. During World War II, American soldiers on Russian soil would drop extra large condoms labeled small to make the Russians think Americans were genetically superior. Vlad the Impaler would cut the breasts off women and feed it to their husbands, and cook children and feed it to their mothers. Then impale them all. Of course. A big part of being locked in the stocks, medieval style, was that anyone could pay you from behind all night and you'd never know who it was. Fun fact. Brothel gets its name because in late medieval England, houses of prostitution would very often serve broth, aka soup. This was sometimes just a front, but some establishments were as well known for their soups as for their prostitutes. Because of this, for some time, it was considered scandalous to eat soup in public. Elizabeth I broke this taboo by insisting that soup be served in court for banquets and feasts. 5% of the male population, and the word is related to Genghis Khan, or roughly 16 million.